Welcome back, folks. This is the More Money Show on WABC Talk Radio. I am very privileged to have with us a special guest today, and that is the great Jason Smith, who is the congressman from Missouri and also has one of the most important positions when it comes to the economy. He's the chairman of the incredibly important Ways and Means Committee, which has oversight over the tax code, over entitlement programs, trade issues. So, Jason, thanks so much for joining this afternoon.
It's great to be with you, Stephen.
So let's get right into it. You are the author of a new tax bill that appears to be moving through Congress. You were telling me earlier that it sailed through the committee. Tell us about what's in that bill and why should people support it?
The main items within the legislation, it's half on the individual side, half business.
Okay.
The individual side is the child tax credit. On the business side, it's the main provisions that have expired from the Trump tax cuts.
Well, we love the Trump tax cuts. You know, I mean, it was Larry Kudlow and I and Art Laffer who helped put that together. So
we had the best economy after the Trump tax cuts.
So what would this make? What features of that bill would it deal with?
Currently, three very important provisions have expired from the Trump tax cuts of 2017. Research and development expensing, interest deductibility, the formula in regards to that for small businesses, and then the 100% immediate expensing is starting to phase out. It was 80%
so that means,
last
again,
year.
just so, because a lot of people aren't tax experts here. So that means if a company buys like equipment or machinery or computers, they can actually write that off, or build a factory, for example. All those expenses they can write off against their taxes 100% in the first year.
The year that they buy it.
Yeah, and that's a big deal, right? It incentivizes companies.
It's a huge economic driver. After we did the Trump tax cuts, the economy grew by 1% above GDP.
Wow.
You know, that's huge, and it's because of what's going. Just these three provisions. I mean, the interest deductibility provision is projected to create 867,000 new jobs just for the couple years that this is in effect. The research and development affects 21 million jobs. Ooh. These are things that will have a multiplying effect to the economy, and it will also be very helpful to get us to the end of 2025, which is the year of tax. I call it the Super Bowl of tax.
Right.
If we do nothing in 2025, we will face a $3.5 trillion increase in taxes.
It'll plunge the economy.
It would destroy the economy.
And so that would just basically wipe out all of what we were able to achieve with those tax cuts. So agree with you entirely on the importance of the expensing provision for that machinery equipment plant, because we want stuff invested here in the United States, right? We don't want it invested
There's
in
a couple other business provisions, too, that's in there. The 179, also the expensing. Back in the Tax Cut and Jobs Act, we increased it from $500,000 to $1 million and made that permanent. Well, this bill also makes permanent, increasing it from $1 million to $1.29 million.
So this
and
is
then
more for
indexing
the
it for
smaller
inflation.
sized businesses.
For small businesses, for the expensing perspective.
Okay, so I like that. Now, I also like the research and development, write-offs, because we have a lot of members at the Committee to Unleash Prosperity who are heavy investors in the pharmaceutical industry. And not the startup companies that are developing these new drugs for Alzheimer's or ALS or whatever, cancer.
Right.
And they say, without this, they don't have the funds. They have to pay taxes and they're losing money, because you have to invest sometimes billions of dollars before you make a penny on these things. So that seems to me pretty important, and it seems these guys who are investing in these companies say it's important. The Wall Street Journal editorial board does not agree with us, though. They say that this is really a giveaway for corporations.
This is research and development immediate expensing. Where we stand right now, since research and development expensing has expired, China is 200% to 1 of advantages that they give to R&D.
Right.
When we're competing on the world stage, especially with China, why would we say, hey, it's better for you to move to China for research and development than to actually do it in the United States? It is just clearly the same thing as expensing.
Yeah.
Instead of a 5-year period where expensing is like 20% every year for research and development, it would be 100%, just like the immediate expensing.
Thank you for that. What Wall Street Journal editorial board does not like about your bill is they don't like the child credit expansion. I'm not wild about that myself. I think on balance what you've done is a positive thing for the economy, although I don't like, all of these credits that give money to people. But you're saying, as if I read correctly your bill, the credit is against the payroll taxes. So someone's working, let's say they have 2 kids, maybe they're not paying a lot of income tax, but they do have to pay payroll tax. So this would be like credited off the payroll tax. Am I explaining that right? Or
So there's 4 main provisions that's changed within here. What we did was preserve the child tax credit that was in the Trump tax cuts of 2017. Right. We preserved the work requirement, which is extremely
that's the most important thing. Yeah, exactly.
That is the most important thing, because whenever the Democrats, back during the American Rescue Plan, had their huge child tax credit, they eliminated the work requirement. And just an interesting statistic.
So then you're basically paying people money
not to work.
And they're not working.
Yeah.
And that's a killer, because we saw, under Obama and also even during COVID, all these people just stopped working and they were getting government checks. And that cannot continue, because we have, 4 or 5 million people who are mostly males who could be and should be working that are not working today.
When their tax credit expired December 31st, just the month of January and February following, 1.7 million people returned to the workforce.
Wow.
That whole year prior, whenever there was no work requirement in the child tax credit, only 1.6 million people in the whole 12 months returned to the workforce.
So when the Journal says, again, sorry, but I just want to make clear on this because it's such an important point. When the Journal says this bill will pay people not to work, you're saying that's just not the fact.
It's not true. And even the Tax Foundation and AEI tax advisors has said that it actually enhances the work requirement, because we eliminated the child penalty. So you actually will work harder if you have multiple children, according to Tax Foundation, AEI. So, there's always going to be people with different arguments on each side of the table. But when you look at the roughly $30 billion that's within the child tax credit, $17 billion of that is eliminating the child penalty, which is very big. Then we also index the child tax credit for inflation for 24 and 25. It has been $2,000 since 2017. It hasn't changed. This would just do the indexing.
Welcome back, folks. This is the More Money Show on WABC Talk Radio, and I am Stephen Moore, and I am interviewing my good friend and a great leader in Congress, Jason Smith, who runs the Ways and Means Committee, and that's the committee that has oversight over tax policy. I wanted to change directions a little bit, if I could, and talk about the big vision of where we eventually want to end up on taxes. Steve Forbes and I and Larry Kudlow and Art Laffer have talked for 40 years about this whole issue, and now you've thought a lot about it as well. Steve Forbes is the big advocate, as you know, of the flat tax. Just get rid of all the garbage in the tax code, get the rates down as low as possible, get rid of the deductions and loopholes and special interest provisions. What do you think about that idea?
It has great merit. We need a more simplified tax code. Back in 2016 and 17, when we were trying to do the Trump tax cuts, we wanted to be able to get to the point that you could file your taxes on one page. You could fill it out on one piece of paper, on a postcard. Our tax code is larger than the Bible, when you're looking at volumes. So any way that we can simplify it, lower the rates, create more growth mechanisms, that's the approach. We need to make sure we can compete with the world on our tax code. We're not always doing that.
This, as you know, it worked under Calvin Coolidge, it worked under Ronald Reagan, it worked under John F. Kennedy, it worked under Trump. When we lower tax rates, as Larry Kudlow would say, good things happen. But I wanted to ask you another reform that has really been talked about. Now, this is the grand reform that I'm sure a lot of people, even in your congressional district, asked you about. And that's the idea of the fair tax, or a national sales tax, which would essentially entirely replace the corporate income tax, the personal income tax, the capital gains tax, the dividend tax, the death tax. And you basically, under that system, as you know, you'd pay taxes like you do in your state. You pay your sales tax, you pay at the cash register. I've always liked that idea. I don't know how practical it is, but it seems to me you're taxing people on what they take out of the economy rather than what they put into the economy. But what are your thoughts about the fair tax?
We actually had the first committee hearing on the fair tax since
Oh, you
I've
did?
been in Congress.
Fantastic.
But we also discussed the flat tax. We discussed all the different
Right.
aspects of the tax. There are numerous members who are aligned with you. They support the fair tax, and they would love to see it. The idea of not having the IRS is pretty tempting.
It is.
So
Right.
that kind of
So you're willing to look into it?
I think when we look at restructuring the tax code, we have to look at everything. So I'm not boxing myself in as supporting any tax proposal. What I'm locking myself in is to simplify the tax code, lower rates, and create more investment.
We got a minute and a half left, and I've abused your time already, but I wanted to ask you one other thing. Donald Trump is talking about a 10% tariff. I'm a free trader. I think you are. I know most of our members are. It's a revenue tariff, and you know what some people would say was, look, you know, tariffs were one of the major way we raised revenue in this country for the first 100 years we were a country before we had an income tax. What are your thoughts about this 10% tariff?
You know, tariffs can be used in multiple ways. Tariffs have been used as leverage to be able to get good things.
And Trump did a pretty good job of that.
Trump did a
using
phenomenal
leverage.
job,
Right.
for example, with Japan.
Right. And Mexico.
Yeah, with the threat
Yes.
of tariffs, and
Yep.
it brought Japan to the table to lower their tariffs. And so it is a tool that should be used appropriately to make sure that we're competitive.
Good.
Because you know you want to make sure you have free trade, but also fair trade.
Right.
And if other countries aren't playing by the same rules, you need to use levers there.
Well, I think that was Trump's, philosophy, that, he understood that we have leverage. His famous book is The Art of the Deal.
Yep.
If you have leverage, you use it. And I think, and I'm a free trade guy, but I thought he used that leverage, as you just said, pretty effectively.
He did.
So,
And I think that's what you have to do, especially when you're looking at China.
Yep.
That was a big approach.
Okay. Jason Smith, thanks so much for joining us.
good to be
Appreciate
with
your
you,
taking
sir.
time out of your
Appreciate
busy
it.
schedule. We're here for a Committee to Unleash Prosperity dinner tonight with Jason Smith and some of the smartest people in New York and around the country. So thanks for joining, and we'll be right back. This is the More Money Show.